left at the altar by the groom. But his billionaire brother took her vows instead. She walked down the aisle, heart-pounding dreams shimmering like her ivory gown, only to be left alone at the altar, humiliated in front of Chicago's elite. But just as the whispers began and the cameras turned cruel, his older brother stood up and said 6 shocking words. "There will be a wedding today." What followed was a whirlwind of scandal, sacrifice, and an unexpected love story that no one, least of all Clara Monroe, could have predicted. What was real? What was manipulation, and could a marriage built on chaos ever lead to true love? Stay until the end to witness every twist before we begin the story. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. The Plaza Hotel ballroom shimmered like a dream, pulled from the pages of a timeless romance. Chandeliers cast golden light across the polished floor. Strings of white orchids trailed from crystal vases, and soft music drifted from a hidden quartet. Every detail had been carefully curated, down to the satin ribbons on the chairs. Clara Monroe stood just beyond the grand doors, her fingers trembling around her bouquet. She took a breath, steadying herself. This was supposed to be her fairy tale raised in a modest walk-up above her mother's bookstore in Brooklyn. Clara had never expected to marry into a family like the Hartwells, America's banking royalty. Her fiancé, Daniel Hartwell, had swept her off her feet with rooftop dinners, private gallery tours, and handwritten letters. He'd been charming, generous, and unpredictable in a way that had made her heart race today. In front of New York's most powerful, he was to be her husband. But as the quartet shifted to the opening notes of the bridal march, the air changed. The officiant exchanged a subtle glance with the event planner. Whispers rustled like wind through the velvet chairs. Clara stepped into the aisle, the hush of the room prickling against her skin. Her mother was seated near the front, her eyes already misting with emotion. Tina, Clara's best friend and fiercest advocate, gave her an encouraging nod. When she reached the altar, she froze. Daniel wasn't there. Only a folded piece of ivory stationery lay on the pillow where he should have stood. The officiant looked at Clara helpless. One of the ushers, shaking, handed her the note. She opened it with unsteady hands. "I can't do this." That was all it said. No reason, no apology, no signature. But she knew that handwriting. And in that moment, something inside her shattered. There were gasps. Camera shutters snapped furiously. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Did he run? Is this a publicity stunt? Was this ever real? Clara felt the heat rise in her chest, the burn of humiliation coursing through her. Her knees threatened to give, but she stood rooted in place, blinking back the tears. She refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these strangers. Then through the chaos, a figure rose from the front row. Nathan Hartwell, older brother to Daniel, CEO of Hartwell Capital. Known for his cold precision and steel composure. He was a man of few words and fewer emotions, but in that moment, his voice cut through the whispers like glass against stone. "There will be a wedding today," Nathan said firmly. Clara turned her head stunned. Nathan stepped forward, his expression unreadable, but resolute. "If Daniel won't be the man he claimed to be, I will not allow Clara to stand here alone. Not like this. If she agrees, I will take his place." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, the furious clicking of reporters' cameras. Eleanor Hartwell, The matriarch rose from her seat in disbelief, her voice low and sharp. "Nathan, what are you doing?" But Nathan didn't answer her. His eyes were fixed only on Clara, her breath caught. She hardly knew him. A few formal dinners, one brief conversation at an art event where he'd complimented her work. That was it. And yet, in his face, she saw no pity, no calculation, just something quiet and steady. A lifeline. Clara looked at Tina, who stood frozen, her mouth open in disbelief. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, watching, waiting. This wasn't what she wanted. Not this way. But neither had she wanted to be left in front of the world like discarded glass. So she nodded, once slowly, and with that, the ceremony continued. The music resumed softer now. Uncertain, Nathan took his place at the altar beside her. His hand, when it touched hers, was firm and warm. He said nothing more. They exchanged vows. Hers were halting. His were simple. "I promise to protect you, with truth, with dignity, with my name." When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the applause was confused, stilted, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that Clara had not crumbled. As the guests rose to leave and the media surged toward the doors, Clara whispered to herself, "This isn't the story I wrote, but maybe it's the one I'll survive." And that was how Clara Monroe became Clara Hartwell. Not by love, but by necessity. But some stories, even the strangest ones, don't end at the altar. Sometimes they're just beginning. Want to know what happens next? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and follow this incredible journey, because part 2 will take you deeper into a world of secrets, strength, and a love no one saw coming. The black town car pulled away from the plaza, its windows darkened against the flashes of paparazzi outside. Inside, Clara Hartwell sat in silence, the lace of her wedding gown bunched awkwardly in her lap. Her bouquet, now wilted, slightly rested on the seat beside her like a forgotten prop. Across from her, Nathan sat with his arms folded, his eyes fixed on the city lights streaking past. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't tense. It was shell-shocked. Clara wasn't sure what to feel. Relief, fury, embarrassment. Her life had just swerved off course in front of half of New York, and now she was legally bound to a man she barely knew. Nathan Hartwell, the famously untouchable CEO, who never appeared in gossip columns and rarely attended family functions unless absolutely necessary. He was the opposite of his brother, in every way composed, stoic, and unwilling to charm. And now, he was her husband. She stared out the window, at the city blurring past her mind, racing. "Why did you do it?" She finally asked, her voice low. Nathan didn't answer right away. Then he turned to her, his tone even. "Because you didn't deserve to be humiliated like that." "That's not an answer," she said. "That's a motive." He nodded once. "Then let me be clear. I stepped in because what Daniel did was cowardly. Because no woman should be left standing alone in front of a crowd that came to watch her fall apart." Clara looked at him, then studied the lines of his face, the sharp jaw, the eyes that didn't flinch even under pressure. "You saved me," she said, "but I don't know what you expect from me now." "Nothing." He replied, "There are no expectations. We'll take this one step at a time." As they pulled into the circular driveway of the Hartwell estate, Clara's stomach tightened. The mansion loomed in front of them, its facade bathed in soft uplighting that made the columns and arched windows glow like a set from an old film. Inside, the staff was waiting in a neat line, maids, chefs, security, all dressed in black, all avoiding her eyes. Nathan led her up the steps, his pace slow, as if giving her a chance to adjust. "This is your home now," he said quietly. She nodded, though the word home felt foreign here. The interior was sleek and cold, white marble floors, towering ceilings, glass walls revealing the nighttime skyline. Everything was beautiful, yes, but also lifeless. Clara had spent her childhood among the smell of books and the hum of customers at her mother's small shop. This felt like a museum. He took her to a suite on the second floor, pushed the door open. "You'll have privacy here," he said. "You can redecorate if you'd like. Make it your own." She stepped inside. The room was immaculate. A cream-colored canopy bed, pale blue armchairs, a fireplace that hadn't been lit in months. "And you?" she asked. "Down the hall," he replied simply. She turned to face him. "And what happens now, Nathan? We just pretend." He gave a faint smile, the first flicker of something human in his otherwise guarded face. No pretending, just figuring it out. Clara sat on the edge of the bed after he left the weight of her gown pressing into her knees. The silence of the mansion felt oppressive. She removed her shoes, undid the buttons of her dress, slowly, each motion, deliberate, trying to process the day. In the adjoining sitting room, someone had laid out chamomile tea and a delicate silver box containing a lavender-scented sleep mask. She stared at them, heart clenching slightly. Thoughtful? Too thoughtful. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to touch them. She climbed into bed, without changing into the offered silk nightgown, pulled the covers over herself, and stared at the ornate ceiling. Was this better than being left at the altar? Maybe. But it still wasn't the dream she'd carried in her heart. That night, Clara didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, she lay still and whispered to the darkness, "I don't know what this is, but I will not be swallowed by it." Outside, the city pulsed on, indifferent and glittering. And in another room, Nathan Hartwell stood by his window, watching the night, his reflection faint in the glass. He didn't know what lay ahead either, but something about Clara's voice at the altar, quiet but unbreakable, had stuck with him. This marriage hadn't started with love, but maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to end without it. Clara adjusted the strap of her camera and lifted it to her eye, framing the shot just right. The garden behind the Hartwell estate, though impeccably manicured, lacked personality. But through her lens, she found Angle's soft light grazing over ivy, a hummingbird mid-hover that made it feel less like a curated showpiece and more like a place to breathe. It had been 2 weeks since the wedding. 2 strange, silent, and surreal weeks. Nathan had kept his word. He gave her space. He respected her rhythm. And in his own quiet way, he watched over her. She would sometimes find little things left outside her suite. A book she'd once mentioned, liking a fresh bouquet of wildflowers, not from the estate's florist, but handpicked. There was thoughtfulness behind the cool exterior, and she couldn't ignore it. But she still didn't know where they stood. They shared a roof, exchanged polite words at breakfast, and yet the air between them buzzed with questions they hadn't dared to voice. The estate staff was kind, but cautious. Clearly instructed not to pry, Clara spent her mornings exploring the property and her afternoons editing photos she hadn't taken for clients, just for herself, for healing. And some part of her, the part that still believed in choosing her own path, found quiet joy in that. One evening, after a particularly long walk, Clara found herself in the expansive study. The walls were lined with books, real ones, not just decor, and a grand piano stood in the corner. It looked like it hadn't been played in years. Her fingers brushed over the keys, and she pressed one softly. The note echoed lingering in the stillness. "You play," came Nathan's voice from behind her. She turned, surprised. "A little. My mom taught me when I was a kid. Haven't touched a piano in years." Nathan stepped inside, setting a crystal glass down on the desk. "My mother used to play. She filled this room with music once. After she passed, no one touched it again." Clara sat on the bench, fingers resting above the keys. Would she mind if someone played it now? I think she'd be glad it wasn't silent anymore. Clara hesitated, then pressed another key this time, following it with a second, then a chord. A soft, hesitant melody began to take shape. Nathan sat across the room listening. "You're better than a little," he said quietly. She glanced up, smiling for the first time in what felt like days. "Music's like photography. You don't forget how to feel, even when you forget the technique." He didn't respond right away, but there was something softer in the way he looked at her. Later that night, as she walked back to her suite, Clara found a package at her door. Inside was sheet music, Debussy's Clair de Lune, and a handwritten note. For when the silence gets too loud. The next morning, she found Nathan in the kitchen, barefoot, a mug of coffee in one hand, and reading the paper in the other. The kitchen wasn't a place she expected to see him. It was too domestic, too normal. "Morning," she said, pouring herself a cup. "Good morning," he replied. "How did the piano feel?" Dusty, honest, and strangely comforting. Nathan folded his paper, setting it aside. "I meant what I said. You can play whenever you want." Clara sipped her coffee. "You don't seem like someone who lets people in easily." He met her eyes. "I'm not." "Then why me?" she asked, not challengingly, just curious. Nathan was quiet for a long time before answering. "Because you didn't run when everything fell apart. Because you didn't cry or scream or hide. You stood there in front of everyone with your dignity intact. That kind of strength, it's rare." She wasn't sure what to say. Compliments weren't new, but this one carried weight. She'd been surviving on instinct, but hearing someone saw something deeper, it touched a part of her she'd kept guarded. "Strength and fear," she said finally, "aren't that different. Sometimes I was just too shocked to fall apart in public." Maybe Nathan said, "But even fear reveals character." They stood in the stillness of the Hartwell kitchen, steam rising from their mugs, and something unspoken settled between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Of pain, of courage, of two people who hadn't chosen this path, but were now walking it side by side, not as strangers anymore, but not yet as something more. Clara stood in the hallway, just outside the closed double doors of the Hartwell boardroom. From inside, the sounds of sharp voices and muffled tension spilled out in waves. She wasn't eavesdropping on purpose, but something about the tone stopped her in her tracks. She recognized Nathan's voice, first low-measured, but laced with something harder than usual. Then another voice, colder, clipped with impatience. It was Penelope Hartwell, Nathan's aunt, and one of the last remaining members of the older generation with a significant share in the family company. "You did this without consulting us." Penelope's voice snapped. "Marrying a woman none of us know, at the very moment the company is trying to stabilize after the press debacle. I did what was necessary, Nathan replied. She's not even one of us. What do you really know about her? Clara's stomach dropped. She backed away quietly before she heard any more. The words rang louder than they should have. Not one of us. She knew she didn't belong in their world of power, lunches, tailored legacy, and family-run empires. But hearing it so bluntly was a different sting entirely. That night, dinner was quiet. Nathan said little, distracted by work. But Clara could feel the distance growing again, one she couldn't name, but it made her chest tighten. When she finally spoke, it wasn't planned. You didn't have to marry me to protect your reputation, she said quietly. Nathan looked up from his plate, brows drawn. That's not why I did it, Clara shrugged. But it helped, didn't it? Stopped the press from eating the family alive. Gave them a narrative you could control. Nathan leaned back in his chair, visibly bracing. You think this was about damage control? I think I don't know what to think. I heard your aunt today. I know how they see me. He was quiet for a beat. Then Penelope doesn't speak for me. But she speaks for the family, doesn't she? Nathan exhaled slowly, folding his hands together. This family isn't a monolith, Clara. You're not a pawn. I didn't make that choice lightly, but you didn't ask me either. That landed. His face tightened. No. He admitted I didn't. She stood then, pushing her chair back gently. I just want to know if this life is something I'm supposed to live in or just pass through. Because right now, I don't feel like I have a place here. Nathan stood too. You have a place. Maybe not the one they understand yet, but I know what I see when I look at you. And what's that? He hesitated, the words fighting to break past his practiced walls. Someone who still believes in meaning. Someone who sees beauty in places the rest of us overlook. And maybe someone I want to learn how to love, right? Clara felt her throat tighten. That sounds nice. But words won't make me feel less invisible in this house. I don't expect words to fix it, Nathan said. But I do expect to earn your trust one step at a time. Clara turned away, unsure if it was fear or hope rising in her chest. I need space. Nathan, not to run away, just to breathe somewhere that doesn't echo with judgment. Then take it, he said gently. You don't owe me your forgiveness, but I'm not going anywhere either. The next morning, Clara packed a small bag and left a note. Not a goodbye, just a line of clarity. I'm still figuring out who I am in this story. I need time to know if this path is mine too. She returned to the South Loop to her mother's old apartment that now sat empty but familiar. Dusty light filtered through gauzy curtains, and the quiet was different than the estate's. It didn't weigh on her. She pulled her camera from its case and stepped onto the fire escape, aiming it at the sunrise. For the first time in weeks, she felt still. Not because the storm had passed, but because she'd chosen the eye of it. And from here, maybe she could start to rebuild not what was expected of her, but what she truly wanted. Clara's fingers worked quickly over the camera lens as a group of kids from her old neighborhood lined up outside the Lincoln Street Community Center. It had been 2 weeks since she'd returned to the South Loop, and each Saturday morning had brought more children, more laughter, and more color back into her life. The photography workshop she had started was still small, just a handful of second-hand cameras and donated prints on the wall, but the impact was real. She saw it in the bright eyes of the kids when they captured a shot they were proud of, in the quiet way they leaned in when she taught them about light and shadow. "Miss Clara, look," a young boy named Mason called out. Waving his digital camera in the air, "I caught the bird flying me. The wings are blurry, but you can tell it's fast." Clara knelt beside him, her heart swelling. "That's called motion blur." "Mason, that's actually really hard to catch. You've got an artist's eye." She hadn't expected this when she stepped away from the Hartwell estate. She just needed space, a reset. But what she found was a version of herself she had nearly forgotten. One who created for joy, not reputation. One who gave back without needing permission. What she didn't know was that Nathan had been quietly watching. Not physically, he hadn't shown his face at the community center, but he'd found ways to support her behind the scenes. It started with a shipment of camera equipment delivered without a sender's name, each piece carefully selected. Then came the anonymous donation that covered the next 6 months of rent for the center. Clara had her suspicions, but she never asked. If it was Nathan, she wasn't sure if she was ready to face what that meant, until one Saturday afternoon, she looked up and saw him standing by the doorway. No suit, no fanfare, just jeans, a navy sweater, and a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. Tulips, her favorite. He waited until she was done, helping a group of kids adjust their exposure settings before stepping forward. "Hi," he said simply, his voice softer than she remembered. Clara didn't respond at first, unsure if it was anger, longing, or gratitude pulsing through her. "What are you doing here? I wanted to see you in your world." Nathan said, "The real one. The one I've only ever glimpsed from a distance." She crossed her arms, guarded. "And what do you think?" "I think," he said, offering her the flowers, "I've never been more sure of how much I got wrong before." The silence between them stretched not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken things. Clara took the flowers, her thumb brushing over the petals. "Why now?" "Because I thought giving you space meant stepping back completely. But I realized that loving someone, really loving them, means showing up. Not just when it's convenient or when it fits the plan." Clara looked at him for a long moment. This wasn't the plan, Nathan. None of it. "I know," he replied. "And maybe that's why it matters. Because despite everything, I still want to walk beside you wherever your road goes, even if it doesn't lead back to the mansion." She turned away slightly, the emotion rising in her throat, too quickly. "I've built something here. Something that feels like me." "I see that," Nathan said, "and I don't want to take it away. I want to help it grow on your terms." A long pause. Then Clara looked back at him. "You think you can fit in here, among paint-stained tables and mismatched chairs?" He smiled. "Only if you'll let me." That evening, after the kids had gone home and the sun had dipped low over the city skyline, Clara and Nathan sat side by side on the center's front steps. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence between them had shifted less like a wall, more like a bridge. For the first time in months, Clara didn't feel like she had to choose between the life she loved and the man who had stepped into it unexpectedly. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for both. The press was merciless. Headlines blared with distorted truths, twisting Clara's story into a narrative of opportunism and deceit. Street artist turned billionaire's bride, too good to be true. Hartwell scandal deepens. Did she plan it all? The internet ran wild, picking apart Clara's every photo, every appearance, every connection to Nathan. And then came the viral video Ethan Hartwell, disheveled and bitter, making wild accusations about his brother and Clara during a drunken tirade caught on someone's phone outside a bar in the Gold Coast district. She's not who you think she is. Ethan spat at the camera. She saw an empire and picked the smarter brother. She's playing the long game. It was ugly, and it spread fast. At first, Clara tried to ignore it. She focused on the kids at the workshop, on the small victories, on the joy of creativity. But the calls started coming. Sponsors backed out. A few parents withdrew their children. Even the community center director hesitated quietly, asking Clara if she could step back for a while until things settled down. It felt like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. She stood alone in the quiet of the art room that evening, staring at the photos pinned to the walls. Smiling children. Candid moments of joy. Everything she had built was being chipped away, not because of what she had done, but because of who she had married. And yet, even in the silence, Clara wasn't alone. Nathan arrived at the center just after dusk. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, measured, steady, purposeful. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, looking at the photos. Then he turned his expression unreadable. "I saw the video," he said quietly. Clara nodded. "It's everywhere. I had to stop 2 board members today from using it to justify pulling funding from our community initiatives." Nathan added, "They want me to release a statement, distancing myself from you to protect the Hartwell name." Clara swallowed. "Are you going to—" Nathan shook his head. "No, I'm going to do the opposite." The next morning, Nathan Hartwell stood at a podium in the headquarters of Hartwell Innovations. Cameras flashed, reporters crowded in. Beside him, Clara sat composed, but pale. She hadn't wanted to be there, but Nathan insisted. "It's not just my truth to defend anymore," he'd said. "My name has been used to spread lies." Nathan began his voice, calm but firm. "Lies about the woman I love. Clara Reynolds is not a pawn. She's not a schemer. She didn't chase a fortune. She built a life, one filled with integrity, with purpose. She founded a program for children in need, and she's changed lives with her art, not her last name." The room was silent. And as for my brother's comments, Ethan is no longer part of this company's leadership. Effective. Immediately, his shares are being bought out. This company will not be held hostage by bitterness. There was a wave of murmurs, but Nathan continued. "I stand by Clara, not because I'm obligated to, but because I know her. I see her, and I will not let anyone rewrite the truth of who she is." Later, back at the community center, the atmosphere had shifted. Parents returned. Donations resumed. The Whisper campaign had lost its momentum, beaten back by transparency and truth. But what mattered more than the headlines was what happened in the quiet hours after. Nathan found Clara sitting in the art room again, staring at a painting one of the children had made a swirl of color, chaotic but full of energy. He sat beside her. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I did," he replied, "because when I saw you standing alone in this room, trying to hold up something so good against the weight of so much noise, I realized I never want you to carry that alone again." She leaned into him, letting her walls down. "I'm still scared," Clara admitted. "So am I," Nathan said. "But maybe we can be scared together and still move forward." And in that moment, it became clear that no matter what storms still waited outside, inside this small sunlit room, filled with color and purpose, something unbreakable had begun to form between them, and for the life they were building together. It was a warm afternoon at Lincoln Park, the first signs of spring pushing through the frost. Children's laughter drifted from the nearby playground, while Clara and Nathan sat on a wooden bench near the lake. The past few months had transformed into something neither of them had anticipated. Not just recovery from scandal, but renewal, healing, and something deeper. An unshakable connection formed in fire and pressure shaped into something enduring. Nathan reached over, gently lacing his fingers through hers. "You've been quiet today," he said softly. Clara tilted her head toward him, her curls catching the sun. "I've just been thinking," she murmured, "about all of it. How I ended up here. How everything seemed like it was falling apart, and somehow it built something stronger." Nathan nodded. It feels like another lifetime. They had come so far from that chaotic day at the Hartwell estate, the one where scandal exploded like a tidal wave and threatened to pull them under. But Clara hadn't been swept away. She'd stood taller, spoken louder, and dared to live with intention. Even as the world tried to reduce her to a tabloid headline, her photography workshops were thriving again. The community center had expanded its programming with Clara at the helm as a creative director. And to everyone's surprise, including her own, she'd begun work on a photo memoir, a collection of images and essays titled Through the Lens of Truth. Publishers were interested. Exhibits were in the works. Nathan had taken a quieter step back from Hartwell Innovation's spotlight to give room for their life together to breathe. He still ran the company with integrity and brilliance, but he no longer allowed the business to consume him. He made time for Sunday morning walks, quiet dinners, and the long talks on the porch that had become their favorite ritual. One morning, Clara woke to find an envelope on the kitchen table addressed in Nathan's handwriting. Inside was a letter, poetic, honest, and full of promise. At the bottom, scribbled in the margin, were 5 simple words: "Will you marry me again?" They never had the wedding they'd imagined. Their first vows were said in whispers, shadowed by fear. Now, with the chaos behind them, Nathan wanted to give Clara the wedding she deserved, not for the world, but for them. The ceremony was held in a restored greenhouse nestled in the heart of Chicago's Garfield Park. Strings of fairy lights hung from the rafters, weaving through vines and cascading flowers. Friends and family gathered not out of duty or curiosity, but out of love and belief in what the couple had created together. Clara walked down the aisle barefoot, her dress simple and flowing a daisy tucked behind one ear. Nathan stood waiting, his eyes never leaving hers. There were no cameras, no headlines, only the rustle of leaves and the quiet hush of hearts listening. Their vows were handwritten this time. Clara's ink smudged slightly from where she'd cried while writing them the night before. "I didn't find you when everything was perfect," she said, her voice clear and soft. "I found you when everything was broken, and still you stayed. You chose me in the storm, and I will choose you every ordinary day for the rest of our lives." Nathan's words were steadier, but no less emotional. "You taught me that love doesn't need a stage or applause, it needs truth. Grace, patience, you've shown me all of it, Clara, and I promise to be worthy of it every day." After the ceremony, they danced beneath the lights, surrounded by laughter and music. Children from Clara's workshops gifted her a handmade scrapbook titled M's, Clara's love story, filled with drawings and snapshots of their lives together. Julian Hartwell sent a message of congratulations and a quiet apology, finally recognizing what his brother had built, not just a marriage, but a legacy rooted in truth. Later that night, as they stood on their balcony, watching the city glow beneath them, Nathan pulled Clara close. "Are you happy?" he asked. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "More than I ever thought I could be." They stood there in silence, wrapped in a love that had survived scandal, judgment, and fear. A love that had grown not despite the chaos, but because of it. And somewhere in the heart of the city, another young woman might be standing alone on the edge of a life that felt impossible. But if she listened closely, perhaps she could hear a quiet truth rising from the stories that came before hers. You are not what they say. You are what you build. Brick by honest brick, with the people who see you not as you've been framed, but as you truly are. In the story of Clara Monroe and Nathan Hartwell, we witness a profound journey of love that began not in comfort, but in chaos. What started as an unexpected and controversial wedding, born out of family pressure, betrayal, and a desperate attempt to preserve reputation, blossomed into something far more meaningful than either of them could have imagined. Clara, a humble and determined photographer from Chicago's South Side, was thrown into the ruthless world of the elite. She stood at the altar, abandoned, humiliated, and heartbroken, only to be offered a lifeline by Nathan, the older brother of her runaway groom. But what makes their journey unforgettable isn't the drama of how it began. It's how they grew into something genuine through vulnerability, trust, and resilience. Clara didn't let public shame define her. She chose to rise to serve her community and to stay rooted in her identity. Nathan, once emotionally distant and shaped by the weight of his family's legacy, learned to open his heart to lead with integrity, not just in business, but in love. Their relationship was never about grand gestures or picture-perfect appearances. It was built in the quiet moments, in garden conversations, in silent support, during media storms, in the everyday acts of respect and kindness. Over time, they transformed a marriage of convenience into a love that was real, imperfect, and deeply intentional. They faced gossip, betrayal, and pressure. But instead of breaking apart, they chose to understand each other. Clara's community work flourished, and Nathan evolved beyond his cold image into a man who supported her dreams unconditionally. They didn't escape the fire. They walked through it together, and it made their bond unshakable. The lesson here is powerful. Love isn't always about the way it starts. Sometimes it begins in the wreckage, in the aftermath of pain, when you have nothing left but honesty. Real love requires courage to speak your truth, to hold someone's hand when the world is watching, and to believe in a future that isn't written. Yet Clara and Nathan teach us that what matters most is not how people perceive your story, but how you choose to write it yourself. In life, we all encounter moments when we feel judged, misunderstood, or pushed into boxes we don't fit in. But just like Clara, you can reclaim your voice. And just like Nathan, you can choose to grow. Don't be afraid to start over or take a step towards something uncertain. Sometimes that leap leads to something more beautiful than you ever dared to expect. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where everything seemed to fall apart, only to discover something deeper within yourself? We'd love to hear your story. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let others find strength in your experience. And if this story moved, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support inspires us to keep telling stories that heal, uplift, and remind us all of what truly matters. See you in the next one.